Usually when we look back at ancient Greek ruins, like the Parthenon.
Right, those perfect marble columns.
Yeah, exactly. Those perfectly symmetrical white marble columns standing against this like bright Mediterranean sky. We're totally conditioned to think of absolute order.
Oh, totally. We think of geometry, logic,
Right. A culture that just had the universe completely figured out. It's also perfectly balanced. It's the cradle of Western civilization, and we just like to imagine it populated by these calm, enlightened philosophers.
Just walking around in crisp white togas.
Exactly. Engaging in these serene debates about virtue and truth.
It's the enduring fantasy, isn't it? Like the Hellenic ideal. Clean, rational, and just completely unbothered by the messy realities of, human existence. It's a really comforting image.
But then you step into the world of Friedrich Nietzsche's debut work, and suddenly that pristine white marble is, it's just drenched in blood and wine.
Yeah, it gets dark fast.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's like those columns are vibrating with this terrifying heavy bass frequency. We are forced to look at a cultural landscape that isn't actually serene at all.
Not even a little bit.
No. Instead, that famous Greek serenity is revealed to be this desperate, fragile illusion. Like a beautiful image constructed specifically to hide a screaming, chaotic abyss that is constantly threatening to swallow them whole.
It completely upends centuries of intellectual tradition. I mean, it is the absolute definition of a philosophical earthquake.
Oh, 100%.
He didn't just disagree with the prevailing academic view of the Greeks. He diagnosed it as a profound misunderstanding of what it actually means to be human.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today our mission is to unpack this foundational, truly explosive text of 19th century philosophy, which is Friedrich Nietzsche's 1872 debut, The Birth of Tragedy.
And it is quite a ride.
It is. And to navigate this, we've been poring over some incredible resources for you, particularly Douglas Burnham and Martin Jessinghausen's highly detailed analytical guides, the Oxford World's Classics translations, and just a massive mountain of contemporary academic critical analysis.
Which honestly is absolutely necessary because the text itself is notoriously dense.
Oh, it's a tough read.
Yeah, it operates right at the intersection of classical philology, radical metaphysics, and avant-garde musical theory. All at once.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This is not just some dry history of Greek theater.
No, not at all.
It is a radical manifesto about suffering, about the sheer overwhelming power of music, and, about how we justify our own agonizing existence. And it was written by a 28-year-old academic prodigy while a massive bloody war was literally raging around it.
Which is just wild context to keep in mind.
It really is. So our blueprint today is to trace the very specific intellectual climate this young man was operating in. Then we'll wade directly into the core of his argument, exploring how the tension between two ancient gods created the greatest art the world has ever seen.
And how a certain famous philosopher supposedly murdered that art.
Yes, the murder mystery. And finally, we'll look at how the shockwaves of this incredibly bold theory are still actively shaping our modern psychology, our art, and honestly, our ambient existential dread today.
It is a massive arc. I mean, we are moving from ancient, wine-soaked religious rituals right into the heart of modern existentialism.
So let's start with the crucible that produced this text. Who exactly is Friedrich Nietzsche in the early 1870s? Because we aren't talking about the older, heavily mustachioed Nietzsche who famously proclaimed the death of God, right?
Oh, far from it. In 1870, Nietzsche's a young man. He was born in 1844 into a highly structured, deeply religious Protestant family in Saxony.
Generations of clergymen in his family.
Right. Exactly. So he has this strict upbringing, but his brilliance is just undeniable, specifically in the realm of classical philology.
So studying ancient languages and texts.
Right. He was studying at Bonn and Leipzig, just deciphering ancient texts, mastering the intricacies of dead languages, and his mind was so sharp, so terrifyingly analytical, that the University of Basel did something virtually unheard of.
Wait, this is the professorship thing, right?
Yeah. They appointed him to a full professorship at the age of 25.
That is insane.
It really is. They bypassed the usual rigorous final examinations entirely and simply awarded him his doctorate based on the articles he had already published.
A 25-year-old tenured professor. That alone is just staggering. But the ivory tower was fundamentally shattered by the reality of European politics pretty quickly.
Precisely. Because in 1870, the Franco-Prussian War erupts. And Nietzsche, despite his academic status, he actually volunteers.
Wow.
Yeah, he serves as a medical orderly for the Prussian forces. And this is crucial for the book. He isn't theorizing about suffering from a cozy library.
He's actually seeing it.
He is at the front, confronted with the visceral, mutilated reality of war. He witnesses the absolute fragility of the human body firsthand.
And he got sick himself, didn't he?
Very sick. He contracts severe dysentery and diphtheria, which nearly kill him. They force him into this lengthy convalescence, and it is during this painful, lingering recovery, with the trauma of the battlefield still incredibly fresh, that he sits down to write the bulk of The Birth of Tragedy.
So the literal thunder of artillery was basically the backdrop to his writing.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to push back here, though. How does a classicist, someone explicitly trained to obsess over the grammatical nuances of, like, a fragmented scroll, suddenly decide to write a sweeping, metaphysical manifesto that infuriates his entire profession? Like, was he abandoning history for philosophy?
Well, he was attempting something much more ambitious than either, actually. He was trying to be a cultural physician.
A physician.
Yeah. He looked at the meticulous, dry, incredibly specialized world of his academic colleagues and saw a symptom of a deeply sick culture. He believed his contemporaries were hoarding facts while completely starving for meaning.
Oh, I like that phrasing. Hoarding facts, but starving for meaning.
Right. And to cure this, he synthesized two massive paradigm-shifting influences. First, the dark, unyielding pessimism of Arthur Schopenhauer.
Okay, let's unpack Schopenhauer really quickly for those who aren't familiar.
Sure. Schopenhauer basically argued that the universe isn't a rational, benevolent place. It is driven by a blind, irrational, ceaselessly striving force he called the will.
The will, got it.
Yeah. And for Schopenhauer, human consciousness is just a tragic accident. It's a localized sensitivity to a universe of endless, pointless pain.
Wow. A very cheerful starting point, then.
Oh, exactly. It's incredibly bleak. But then Nietzsche combines this suffocating pessimism with the revolutionary aesthetic theories of his close friend at the time, the composer Richard Wagner.
Ah, Wagner. That's a huge piece of this puzzle.
A massive piece. Wagner believed that totalizing art, specifically mythic, overwhelming music dramas, could fundamentally redeem and transform a fractured society. So Nietzsche basically took Schopenhauer's diagnosis of a painful universe and applied Wagner's cure.
And he applied it directly to the ancient Greeks, which is what made it so scandalous to his colleagues. We touched on this at the beginning, but let's go deeper. The prevailing German intellectual establishment at the time, thinkers like Joachim Winckelmann and Friedrich Schiller, had essentially built their entire careers on the Hellenic myth.
Right, the idea of the perfectly balanced Greeks.
Yeah, Winckelmann famously summarized the essence of Greek art as noble simplicity and quiet grandeur. They viewed the Greeks as these perfectly adjusted, harmonious children of nature who intuitively understood the balance of the cosmos.
And Nietzsche looks at that and essentially calls it cowardly nonsense.
He does not hold back.
No, he argues that this famed noble simplicity was not some innate, innocent disposition. The Greeks weren't naive optimists. They were uniquely, excruciatingly sensitive to the horrors of existence.
Right, they saw the cruelty of nature, the arbitrariness of fate, the inevitability of death.
Exactly. And their response wasn't serene acceptance. Their response was to actively construct a brilliant, blinding illusion. The beauty of their art was quite literally a survival mechanism.
That tension is baked right into the physical publication of the book itself, actually. If you pick up a modern copy of The Birth of Tragedy, you immediately run into this bizarre double beginning. You have the original 1872 preface, which is this glowing, highly charged dedication to Richard Wagner,
where he boldly declares that art, not morality, is the true metaphysical activity of humanity.
Yes, it's an incredibly aggressive opening volley. But then you literally turn the page and you encounter a second preface. This one was added 14 years later in 1886, and it's titled An Attempt at a Self-Criticism.
And the older, more experienced Nietzsche absolutely eviscerates his younger self here.
It's so funny to read. He calls the book impossible. He criticizes it for being badly written, overly emotional, dripping with saccharine romanticism.
And worst of all, for relying on the tired philosophical vocabulary of Schopenhauer and Kant to express ideas that were actually completely original.
It's an amazing rhetorical move. But he doesn't disown the core thesis, does he? I mean, he hates the prose, but he doubles down on the central philosophical question.
He does. He pivots brilliantly. The older Nietzsche strips away the Wagnerian hero worship and asks the fundamental question that the book originally raised.
Which is?
Is pessimism necessarily a symptom of cultural decline and exhaustion? Or is it possible to have a pessimism of strength?
Pessimism is...
Yeah, a pessimism that arises not from weakness, but from an overwhelming, overflowing vitality. He realizes that his 28-year-old self was actually grasping at something profound. The idea that only a truly strong, robust culture has the courage to look directly into the terrifying abyss of existence without needing to invent a comforting afterlife to make it bearable.
Which brings us to his realization that his actual enemy all along wasn't just bad academic history, but the entirety of Christian morality.
Right, because he viewed Christianity as a will to negate life.
Exactly. A system that inherently devalues this messy, painful physical world in favor of an imaginary, perfect, painless heaven. In 1872, he hadn't fully sharpened that specific knife yet, so he hid his critique behind aesthetic theory.
But the foundation of that aesthetic theory is just unforgettable. Let's delve into the core duality that drives the entire argument. These are arguably the two most famous concepts he ever introduced.
Yes, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. These aren't just aesthetic categories for Nietzsche, right? They're fundamental antagonistic forces of nature that happen to express themselves through human art.
That's a great way to put it. And they are named, of course, for the two Greek deities. Apollo is the god of light, of prophecy, of boundaries, and of the plastic arts. So sculpture, architecture, epic poetry. Apollo represents the realm of the dream.
And Schopenhauer's influence is really heavy here, isn't it?
Immensely heavy. Apollo is the embodiment of what Schopenhauer called the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation.
Okay, and what exactly does that mean in practical terms?
It is the cognitive framework that structures reality. It is the force that dictates time, space, and causality. It's the boundary maker. It is what separates you from me and what separates a tree from the sky. It provides clarity, distinct form, and individual identity.
I was trying to think of a modern analogy for this. If we were to use one, Apollo is kind of like the beautifully designed user interface of a complex operating system on your computer.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like it provides clear folders, distinct icons, smooth windows. It makes the digital environment navigable, understandable, and visually pleasing. You know exactly where the boundaries of one application end and another begins.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. And Dionysus is the exact opposite.
Right.
Dionysus is the god of wine, of intoxication, of ecstatic music, and of formless, turbulent flux. Dionysus represents the absolute shattering of the individual.
So in the Dionysian state, all those rigid Apollonian boundaries, the UI, the folders, the distinct icons, they just completely dissolve.
Exactly. Dionysus is the raw, chaotic, endless stream of machine code underneath the interface. It's an undifferentiated mass of data that would be completely overwhelming and incomprehensible if you had to look at it directly.
Just staring at ones and zeros flying past at light speed.
Right. It's a return to the primordial unity of existence. In a Dionysian state of intoxication, the alienation that defines everyday human life just vanishes. You are no longer an isolated individual. You merge completely with your fellow human beings and with the terrifying, churning power of nature itself.
It is a state of ecstatic oneness, but it is also deeply terrifying because it requires the complete annihilation of your individual self.
Absolutely. Now, Nietzsche makes a crucial historical distinction early on in the text. He argues that this Dionysian energy wasn't actually unique to the Greeks. He talks about the barbarian cultures that surrounded them.
Right, but he says those non-Greek Dionysian festivals were essentially just savage, uncontrolled regressions, doesn't he?
Yes. He describes them as a witch's brew of cruelty and unchecked sexual lust. It was pure destruction. But the Greeks somehow managed to civilize this overwhelming force. They didn't suppress it, but they brought it into a tense, vibrating truce with Apollo.
And that truce is basically the miracle of Greek culture. Because if you only have Apollo, your culture becomes rigid, calcified, and emotionally dead like the stiff, imposing statues of ancient Egypt. It's all boundaries and no lifeblood.
But if you only have Dionysus, you just have barbaric riots and the destruction of all social order.
Right, so when these two antagonistic forces are forced into a mutual struggle, when the raw, chaotic energy of Dionysus is channeled through the beautiful structuring forms of Apollo, they generate a profound artistic exaltation.
But we have to ask, why did the Greeks specifically need this synthesis so desperately? Nietzsche answers this by deploying one of the most haunting myths in the entire classical tradition. It perfectly encapsulates the underlying horror that the Greeks were trying to manage.
The wisdom of Silenus.
Yes. Silenus was a mythic figure. A half-animal forest demon who is the old companion and tutor of Dionysus. As the story goes, King Midas, the same king obsessed with gold, hunts Silenus down in the forest.
He traps him, right?
He does. He finally captures the elusive demon and demands to know the answer to the ultimate philosophical question: what is the absolute best and most desirable thing for mankind?
And Silenus doesn't want to answer. He remains stubbornly silent. But Midas is a king. He exerts his power, he forces the issue, and finally Silenus breaks.
But he doesn't give a philosophical discourse. He bursts into this shrill, terrifying laughter and delivers a devastating verdict. He says, and I'm paraphrasing the translation here, "Miserable, ephemeral race, children of chance and toil, why do you force me to tell you what would be most beneficial for you not to hear? What is best of all is utterly beyond your reach. Not to be born, not to be nothing. But the second best for you is to die soon."
It is an absolutely chilling moment. Best not to be born. It is the ultimate expression of existential nihilism.
Well, it really is. So if that is the underlying reality that the Greeks felt in their bones, how does their art function in relation to it?
Well, it dictates the entire function of their art, doesn't it? The Greeks understood the truth of Silenus. They felt the terror of their own vulnerability and the meaningless cruelty of the natural world. If they had simply accepted that truth without a filter, the logical result would be mass despair or paralysis or just mass suicide.
Exactly. To survive that paralyzing knowledge, they engaged in a colossal act of artistic creation. They invented the radiant, majestic Olympian gods: Zeus, Athena, Apollo. These weren't just objects of religious worship in the modern sense. They were an Apollonian mirror.
They created a beautifully structured dream world specifically to serve as a shield against the suffocating pessimism of Silenus. They justified human life by inventing immortal gods who lived that same human life, but gloriously, loudly, and without the finality of death.
Right? They didn't invent a moral heaven where the good are rewarded. They just invented a bigger, brighter version of the world they were already living in.
Which is brilliant. And this leads Nietzsche into his analysis of the artist. He uses the concept of the naive artist, which was a term popularized by Schiller, but he completely redefines it here.
He does. The academic guides really emphasize his use of Raphael's painting, The Transfiguration, to explain this mechanism.
Oh, this is a brilliant visual aid. For you listening, if you look at the Raphael painting, it is split into two distinct halves. The bottom half is dark, chaotic, and centers on a boy who is possessed by demons, surrounded by terrified, helpless people. It represents the eternal, primordial pain and confusion of the world.
It is the Dionysian reality.
Exactly. But from that agonizing lower half, the top half of the painting emerges. It is a vision of Christ floating in the air, glowing with divine light, perfectly serene and beautiful.
And Nietzsche argues that the Apollonian beauty of the top half is not a denial of the pain in the bottom half. It is a necessary illusion generated out of that pain. The Apollonian dream is the appearance of appearance.
It is a double distillation of reality designed to make existence bearable. And Nietzsche points to Homer as the ultimate naive artist, the genius who creates perfectly clear, objective, beautiful illusions that allow the Greeks to endure their own existence.
But wait, if Homer is the perfect, objective Apollonian artist, what does Nietzsche do with a figure like Archilochus?
The lyric poet.
Right. Archilochus was an ancient lyric poet famous for writing incredibly passionate, volatile, highly subjective poetry. He's always screaming, "I want this," or "I hate that," or "I am suffering."
Yeah, if the whole point of art is to escape the painful reality of individual existence through a beautiful, objective dream, doesn't the poet shouting about his personal heartbreak completely ruin the mechanism?
That is exactly the contradiction Nietzsche has to resolve. How can subjective personal poetry be considered genuine art if true art requires escaping the individual self?
What?
He solves this by leaning heavily into Schopenhauer's theory of music.
Okay, how does that work?
He argues that the I in the lyric poet's song is not the literal, everyday guy named Archilochus complaining about his bad day.
So he's not just writing a diary entry.
Exactly. The true lyric poet has actually surrendered his personal ego entirely. He is merged with the Dionysian primordial unity. He feels the raw underlying pain and joy of the entire universe, but he cannot express that raw state directly. It would just be overwhelming noise.
Right.
So the poet uses Apollonian power to project that universal emotion back into specific images, words, and personal narratives. The I in the poem is a metaphysical I. It is the voice of the universe itself wearing the temporary mask of the poet.
It's like the poet is acting as a step-down transformer for high-voltage electricity. He takes the infinite, lethal voltage of universal suffering and steps it down into a localized, personal poem so that we can actually perceive it without being incinerated.
That's a great way to put it. And this leads into his analysis of the folk song, which he views as language desperately trying to imitate the supreme, formless power of music. The melody comes first, and the melody generates a constant stream of poetic images.
So the music is the Dionysian truth, and the lyrics are the Apollonian attempt to grasp it.
Precisely. And this perfectly sets the stage for the central thesis of the book. We have the two forces, Apollo and Dionysus, the dream and the intoxication, the structured image and the raw music.
The critical question is, how did these two ancient enemies finally combine to give birth to the highest form of art Greek tragedy?
Which takes us into the birth and the mechanics of tragedy itself, sections 7 through 10. And Nietzsche starts by solving a historical mystery. It's well documented that tragedy originated from the chorus. Before there were actors doing dialogue on stage, there was just a chorus singing and dancing, specifically a chorus of satyrs.
The mythical followers of Dionysus, right? Depicted as half man, half goat.
Exactly. For centuries, classical scholars tried to explain away the chorus. They proposed incredibly dry, rational theories. Maybe the chorus represented the ideal spectator, politely observing the action. Or maybe it represented the democratic public of Athens, providing a sort of civic commentary on the actions of kings.
And Nietzsche just utterly demolishes these polite civic interpretations, right?
Oh, completely. He points out how absurd it is to think that a group of men dressed as ecstatic, animalistic goat demons were meant to represent a rational, democratic public.
Right. You don't dress up as a woodland demon to give a polite critique of municipal policy. That just makes no sense. So what is the chorus actually doing?
Nietzsche argues that the chorus of satyrs operates as a living wall. It physically and psychologically separates the religious cult of the theater from the mundane, everyday reality of the city. When the Athenian citizen enters the theater and watches this swirling, ecstatic chorus, he is pulled out of his daily identity as a merchant or a soldier or a politician.
He is drawn into a state of Dionysian enchantment.
And in that state, he experiences what Nietzsche calls metaphysical consolation.
Metaphysical consolation. That phrase is so crucial. What exactly does that consolation feel like?
It is the sudden, visceral realization that despite the constant, inevitable death of individual people, despite the fact that you will die and your family will die, the underlying life force of the universe is indestructible, powerful, and eternally joyous. The individual perishes, but the primordial unity remains completely unaffected.
And he emphasizes the brutal reality of the satyr to make this point. He contrasts the Greek satyr with a modern artificial idea of the idyllic shepherd, the highly sanitized, cute peasant playing a flute in a Renaissance painting, completely disconnected from the dirt and danger of actual nature.
Yes. Nietzsche says the satyr is the true man. The satyr represents human nature stripped of all cultural illusions, intimately connected to the raw, terrifying power of the earth.
So the entire drama that unfolds on the stage is not a realistic play. It is a shared hallucination. It is an Apollonian vision generated by the enchanted Dionysian chorus.
That is the essential mechanism. The chorus is experiencing the overwhelming Dionysian reality, and the action on the stage is their way of projecting that reality into a visible Apollonian form, which leads us to the concept of the Apollonian mask.
Oh, love this part.
When we read the great tragedies of Aeschylus or Sophocles, we are immediately struck by how beautiful, logical, and clear the dialogue is. Characters like Oedipus or Prometheus speak in perfectly structured poetry. They argue logically. They seem completely rational.
But Nietzsche says that clarity is a trick, right? It's a survival mechanism for the audience. I like to think of it like watching a solar eclipse.
How so?
Well, if you look directly at the eclipse, the terrifying, overwhelming reality of the Dionysian abyss, it will blind you. It will destroy you. So what do? You build a pinhole projector. You project a small, clear, safe image of the event onto a piece of cardboard.
Ah, I see.
The beautiful, logical dialogue of the tragic hero is the projection on the cardboard. It is a bright optical illusion designed to heal the eyes after they've been staring into the terrifying dark.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The beautiful form of the hero makes it possible to endure the terrifying truth of the myth. And this brings us to the most radical, foundational claim Nietzsche makes about the nature of the plays themselves in section 10.
This is the massive reveal. He argues that despite the variety of stories, whether it's Oedipus solving the riddle of the Sphinx and uncovering his horrific crimes, or Prometheus defying the gods and being chained to a rock to have his liver eaten out, every single tragic hero is fundamentally the exact same person.
Yes. They are all just masks for one single hidden god, Dionysus.
This is the beating heart of his theory. The protagonist of every Greek tragedy is always Dionysus experiencing the agonies of individuation.
And Nietzsche grounds this in the ancient esoteric myth of Zagreus. Zagreus was a young manifestation of Dionysus who was hunted down by the Titans and literally torn to pieces. That violent dismemberment is the ultimate symbol for the pain of becoming an individual.
Because to exist as an individual, you must be torn away from the primordial unity. You have to be cut off.
Precisely. The state of being an individual is inherently a state of suffering, of separation, of longing. So when the audience watches Oedipus suffer the agonizing consequences of his actions, they aren't just feeling sad for a fictional king. Subconsciously, they recognize that Oedipus is a mask for the torn and suffering Dionysus.
They're witnessing the universal pain of individuation.
And because they're anchored by the chorus, they simultaneously feel the ecstatic joy of knowing that behind this suffering mask, the original, unified life force of the god remains completely intact and indestructible.
It's an incredibly delicate, miraculous balance. The tragedy gives us the terrifying, boundary-dissolving music of the Dionysian chorus, but it immediately shields us with the beautiful, structured Apollonian myth of the hero. It allows us to process the horror of existence and transform it into an aesthetic triumph.
But this perfect equilibrium did not last.
No, it did not. The delicate tension snapped. And this plunges us into the great murder mystery of the book, moving into sections 11 through 15. Nietzsche sets up a crime scene. Greek tragedy, the highest achievement of human culture, is dead. And he is determined to identify the killers.
And he names the immediate culprit without hesitation, Euripides.
Euripides, the third of the great Athenian tragedians, following Aeschylus and Sophocles. By conventional metrics, he is considered a genius, right? A master of psychological complexity.
Right, but Nietzsche accuses Euripides of committing an unforgivable aesthetic crime. He accuses him of deliberately extinguishing the Dionysian spirit by introducing mundane, naturalistic reality onto the sacred stage.
Okay, I have to step in and defend Euripides here for a second. Why is making characters act like real people a crime? Today, we prize psychological realism. We want characters to have complex motivations, to speak in ways we recognize, to struggle with relatable, everyday problems. Why is that the murder weapon that kills tragedy?
Because, in Nietzsche's view, relatable, everyday problems do not provide metaphysical consolation. If you turn a mythic hero into just another guy with a complicated family dynamic, you strip away the universal resonance. Euripides brought the mundane spectator onto the stage.
So he made the characters reflect the exact petty reality of the people sitting in the audience.
Exactly. And by doing so, he destroyed the living wall that the chorus had built. The audience was no longer transported into a realm of mythic awe. They were just watching a reflection of their own civic lives.
He traded the infinite for the familiar. And Nietzsche gets very specific about the actual dramatic techniques Euripides used to dismantle the genre. He points to the explanatory prologue, right?
Yes. In older tragedies, the myth unfolds organically, mysteriously. Euripides just has a character walk out at the very beginning and flatly explain the entire backstory and the plot. He removes the mystery.
And at the other end of the play, he relied heavily on the deus ex machina, literally using a mechanical crane to drop a god onto the stage to magically resolve the plot and provide a neat, logically satisfying happy ending.
He stripped away the profound, unresolved terror of the myth and replaced it with tidy, mechanical plot resolutions.
But Nietzsche isn't done. Euripides was just the hitman holding the weapon. He was the vessel. Nietzsche looks past Euripides to find the true mastermind, the intellectual demon who was whispering in his ear. And he points his finger directly at the man usually considered the greatest hero of Western philosophy.
Socrates.
Yes. He accuses Socrates.
It is a stunning subversion. Socrates is the patron saint of rational inquiry, but for Nietzsche, Socrates is the ultimate arrogant rationalist buzzkill.
Total buzzkill.
He is the man who demands that the universe must submit to human logic. Nietzsche defines this destructive new force as aesthetic Socratism. The supreme law of this new worldview is, in order to be beautiful, everything must be intelligible.
If it cannot be logically explained, it has no value. It is like demanding a comprehensive spreadsheet with a verified ROI to justify why a poem makes you cry. The demand itself is so fundamentally opposed to the nature of the art that it destroys the art in the process of trying to analyze it.
Exactly. This aesthetic law is a direct mirror of Socrates' most famous philosophical principle. Knowledge is virtue. Socrates believed that all human error, all sin, all suffering was simply the result of ignorance.
He believed that if you applied rigorous, conscious reasoning to every aspect of life, you could basically solve the human condition.
Right. Instinct, intuition, myth, the Dionysian embrace of the unknown, all of these were dismissed as dangerous irrationality. For Nietzsche, this arrogant, relentless optimism is what forces tragedy to commit suicide. Tragedy requires the irrational, the musical, the mythic shadow.
Once you shine the harsh, interrogating spotlight of Socratic logic onto a myth, the myth just evaporates. And Nietzsche doesn't just leave this as a critique of ancient Athens, does he? He immediately scales it up to a macro level, diagnosing the entire trajectory of Western civilization.
He says that ever since Socrates, we have been living in an Alexandrian culture.
Named after the Great Library of Alexandria, right?
Exactly. It is a culture of critics, scholars, and scientists. It is a society that believes encyclopedic knowledge and technological advancement can cure the fundamental ills of existence. It replaces the deep, mythic, instinctual understanding of life with a frantic accumulation of data.
It operates on the profound delusion that thought, guided by the thread of causality, can reach into the deepest abysses of being and actually correct reality.
It is the ultimate hubris of rationalism. But Nietzsche identifies the fatal flaw in this system. Science and logic are incredibly powerful tools, but eventually, they inevitably hit a wall.
They push their line of inquiry to the absolute limits of the physical universe, and there, logic breaks down.
Yes. The rational mind stares into the inexplicable, unavoidable reality of suffering and death, and it has no spreadsheet to fix it. And when logic fails to explain the pain of existence, the culture collapses into a profound existential crisis.
That crisis is exactly what Nietzsche saw happening around him in 19th-century Germany. He saw a society suffocating under the weight of its own rationalism, disconnected from myth, exhausted by its own intellectualism.
So, if Socratic rationalism is the disease, what is the cure? How does a society rediscover its vitality? This brings us to the pivot of the book, starting in section 16, which is the possibility of the rebirth of tragedy.
And for Nietzsche, the antidote to a hyper-rational society is found in one specific medium: music.
He returns to Schopenhauer to explain why music holds this unique power. Schopenhauer argued that all the other arts, painting, sculpture, even literature, are fundamentally copying phenomena. They are copying the superficial appearances of the world.
They operate within the Apollonian realm of forms and concepts.
But music is fundamentally different in kind. Music does not copy the appearance of the world. It is a direct, unmediated copy of the will itself.
It bypasses the brain's rational filters entirely. You don't have to consciously understand the structural theory of a chord progression to feel a visceral wave of sorrow or triumph when you hear it. It speaks directly to the primordial essence within us.
And this allows Nietzsche to explain the unique mechanism of tragic joy, or what he calls the joy in annihilation. Dionysian art, true mythic music, makes us feel the eternal joy of existence precisely through the destruction of the individual phenomenon.
We watch the tragic hero be dismantled by fate, but the soaring underlying music communicates a deeper truth. Like, do not weep for the shattered mask. The life force beneath it is eternal.
Exactly. But he looks at the musical landscape of his own time, specifically traditional opera, and sees it as completely bankrupt.
Oh, he hates traditional opera.
He despises it because it is the epitome of Socratic Alexandrian decadence. Why? Because the inventors of opera subordinated the music to the text. They were driven by a rational, Apollonian desire to clearly understand the words the singer was saying.
They treated music as just pretty emotional wallpaper to decorate the dialogue. And by doing that, they completely neutered music of its terrifying Dionysian myth-making power.
But then, amidst this cultural wasteland, Nietzsche points to a beacon of hope. He argues that the trajectory of German music building, from the mathematical profundity of Bach to the emotional expansiveness of Beethoven, and culminating in the revolutionary works of Richard Wagner, is the actual, literal rebirth of the Dionysian spirit.
He focuses intensely on Wagner's masterpiece, Tristan und Isolde. He views Wagner as the first artist since the ancient Greeks to actually get the formula right.
Wagner creates a modern tragedy where the mythic narrative serves as a necessary Apollonian shield, protecting the audience from being completely annihilated by the sheer, overwhelming Dionysian power of his orchestral score.
If you listen to the prelude of Tristan, it is famously built on unresolved dissonance. It is a surging, aching, endless longing that refuses to resolve into a comfortable chord.
And Nietzsche argues that if we were to experience that pure Dionysian longing without a visual anchor, our individual identities would just shatter under the emotional weight. The story of Tristan and Isolde, the specific, visible Apollonian myth, gives us something to focus on so that we can endure the musical revelation.
Now, if I am a listener hearing this for the first time, I might be profoundly skeptical. I might say, okay, fine. Richard Wagner wrote a very intense emotional opera. But why does this matter outside the theater? How does a night at the opera actually save a culture from an existential crisis?
Nietzsche anticipates this exactly in sections 22 and 23. He argues that the health of the theater is inextricably linked to the health of the state and the culture at large. A culture without a unifying myth becomes secularized, rootless, and exhausted.
It fragments into a society of cynical, isolated consumers, driven only by rational self-interest. You lose the collective soul.
Precisely. And he introduces the concept of the aesthetic listener. An aesthetic listener is someone who retains the capacity to truly experience tragedy, to feel the terror of life and the beauty of form simultaneously, without trying to logically solve the play like a puzzle.
This experience is not escapism. It is a profound, necessary exercise in holding conflicting truths.
A society composed of aesthetic listeners is robust, vital, and deeply rooted. They have the psychological infrastructure to face the horrors of reality without collapsing into nihilism.
Which brings us to his ultimate aesthetic justification in the final sections, the grand, sweeping conclusion of his textual argument. He draws a direct, a literal parallel between human suffering and musical theory.
Yes, he says that the pain we experience in tragedy, and by extension the pain we experience in life, is exactly analogous to the pleasure of musical dissonance.
It is a stunning analogy to end on. In music, a dissonant chord creates structural tension. It clashes, it actively hurts the ear slightly, it demands resolution.
Nietzsche is proposing that human beings are essentially dissonance incarnate. We are contradictory, suffering, temporary creatures. And just as a dissonant chord requires a subsequent consonant chord to give it meaning and beauty within a composition, our painful dissonant existence requires the Apollonian illusion to make it beautiful and bearable.
We need both. The final vision of the book is this ultimate necessary reconciliation. Apollo and Dionysus cannot destroy each other. They must form a fraternal bond. Dionysus must speak the language of Apollo, meaning the raw, chaotic energy of the universe must take on beautiful, understandable forms.
And Apollo must finally speak the language of Dionysus, meaning those beautiful forms must be used to express the deepest, darkest truths of existence, rather than just hiding from them.
It is a majestic, breathtaking theoretical architecture.
It really is.
It really is. But as we pivot to the actual aftermath of the book's publication, we have to look at how this majestic theory was actually received by the people he worked with, because it wasn't pretty.
Oh, it was a bloodbath. It was essentially academic suicide.
Total disaster. The leading classical philologist of the German university system, a highly respected scholar named Ulrich von Wunderlowitz-Moellendorff, read it and went on the attack.
He published a scathing pamphlet, essentially dismissing the entire book as historically inaccurate, wildly speculative garbage. He pointed out that Nietzsche provided virtually no footnotes, no objective historical methodology, and cheerfully ignored decades of serious, painstaking philological research.
And from a strict empirical Alexandrian point of view, Wellamo wasn't really wrong, was he?
No, he wasn't. Nietzsche was ignoring the rules of his discipline. He was making massive intuitive leaps without providing the textual receipts. Wilamowicz's attack effectively destroyed Nietzsche's reputation within the university system. Students actively boycotted his classes.
His close friend, Erwin Rohde, tried to mount a defense in print, and Richard Wagner himself wrote an open letter defending the book. But in the realm of academia, the damage was absolute and irreversible. He became an intellectual pariah in the very field he was supposed to be leading.
But, and this is the incredible irony of history, while it failed spectacularly as a dry history textbook, it succeeded wildly as a foundational work of modern cultural theory.
The shockwaves eventually bypassed the philology departments and hit the rest of the world. The intellectual legacy is almost impossible to overstate. It became a cornerstone of modernism.
Just look at literature. Thomas Mann's entire bibliography is haunted by this book. In his novella Death in Venice, you have a highly disciplined, repressed, perfectly Apollonian writer who travels to Venice and slowly has his entire identity dissolved and destroyed by the reemergence of dark, uncontrollable Dionysian desires.
Or look at Andre Gide exploring moral transgression in The Immoralist, or D.H. Lawrence exploring primal blood consciousness in The Plumed Serpent. They are all utilizing Nietzsche's framework.
And the impact on psychology is incredibly direct. The split between the rational, organizing Apollonian force and the irrational, chaotic Dionysian force is the direct ancestor of Sigmund Freud's architectural model of the mind.
Oh, totally. The Apollonian maps perfectly onto the ego, the conscious mind trying to maintain order and navigate reality. The Dionysian is the id, the deep, roiling unconscious filled with primitive drives.
It also clearly anticipates Freud's later dualism between eros, the drive for life and connection, and thanatos, the death drive that seeks to dissolve the tension of individual existence by returning to an inorganic state of nothingness.
It even fundamentally shaped 20th century anthropology. The legendary American anthropologist Ruth Benedict utilized Nietzsche's exact terminology in her groundbreaking 1936 book, Patterns of Culture.
Right. She analyzed different Native American cultures through this lens, categorizing societies like the Pueblo-Indians as Apollonian because they culturally prioritized restraint, sobriety, and strict social order.
While categorizing cultures like the Plains Indians as Dionysian because they culturally prioritized extreme emotional expression and the pursuit of ecstatic visionary states.
And obviously, philosophy itself was forever altered. This book laid the groundwork for existentialism. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus spent their careers grappling with the absurdity of a universe devoid of inherent, objective meaning, which is essentially the wisdom of silliness.
They echoed Nietzsche's central thesis that if the universe won't provide a justification for our suffering, we must step up and create our own aesthetic and personal justifications for life.
Later on, post-structuralists like Jacques Derrida drew heavily on Nietzsche's strategy of interrogating supposed historical origins and his brilliant dismantling of traditional binary oppositions.
It is a text that simply refuses to stay in the past, which perfectly brings us to our final overarching question. We are sitting here right now. Why should you, listening to this deep dive today, care about a notoriously dense book concerning ancient Greek theatrical traditions written by a frustrated academic in 1872?
You should care because Nietzsche's diagnosis of Alexandrian culture is a painfully accurate description of the world we currently inhabit.
We are the ultimate realization of Socratic optimism. We live in an era completely dominated by scientism, by rationalism, by the belief that data collection is the highest form of truth. We have algorithms for everything, from our sleep cycles to our romantic partnerships.
We have this deeply ingrained Silicon Valley solutionism, the belief that if we just gather enough data, build a powerful enough AI, and optimize enough supply chains, we can eventually eradicate human suffering.
We believe we can spreadsheet our way out of the human condition.
And yet, despite being the most materially wealthy, technologically advanced, logically driven society in human history, we are suffering from a staggering, paralyzing crisis of meaning. We are materially rich, but mythically starved.
It is the exact existential trap he predicted. When you demand that everything be logically justifiable, you slowly eradicate the sacred, the mysterious, and the mythic.
And when Socratic optimism inevitably fails to explain why profound tragedies still happen, or fails to provide compelling reason for why we should get out of bed in the morning despite the suffering, the culture collapses into modern nihilism.
We see this pervasive, ambient existential anxiety everywhere. Think about how we interact with social media. We spend hours constructing these perfectly curated, highly filtered, impeccably managed Apollonian identities online.
We build these bright, shiny illusions of our lives.
But beneath the surface, everyone is incredibly anxious, constantly feeling the chaotic, messy, terrifying pull of the Dionysian reality that we absolutely refuse to acknowledge in public.
We constantly try to sanitize life. We try to push the wisdom of silence away with distraction, with pharmaceuticals, with endless streams of content, rather than metabolizing it through profound art.
But Nietzsche's enduring lesson, the core truth that survived the academic backlash, is that human existence cannot be justified by moral equations or scientific data.
Existence can only truly be justified as an aesthetic phenomenon. Art, myth, and deep creativity are not luxuries. They are the fundamental mechanisms by which we process the suffering, the chaos, and the sheer overwhelming noise of life.
We need the dissonance. We need to look directly at the terror of the abyss, feel the weight of it, and then have the supreme strength to transform it into something beautiful. That is an incredibly powerful thought.
It really is.
So, to wrap up our journey today, we have traveled from the wild, wine-soaked, boundary-dissolving satyr choruses of ancient Greece through the meticulous, demanding rationalism of Socrates into the swelling, unresolved, dissonant chords of Richard Wagner, and finally out into the stark, data-driven, existential landscape of our modern world.
Nietzsche showed us that the pristine white marble of our civilization is not a foundation of solid rock. It is a beautiful, fragile bridge built directly over a terrifying, awe-inspiring abyss.
And he taught us that true psychological and cultural health isn't about avoiding the abyss, but having the strength to look down into it, to sing about it, and to aggressively affirm life anyway. And so I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to seriously mull over as you navigate the highly optimized architecture of your day. If our modern world has successfully eradicated almost all of our unifying irrational myths in the name of logic, science, and historical accuracy, are we actually safer? Or have we simply stripped away our vital Apollonian shields, leaving ourselves entirely defenseless against the inevitable crushing dissonance of human suffering? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.